Firstly, we're not aging faster than people did in the middle of the 19th century. We're just aging sicker. We have this ghastly, prolonged twilight of disability and suffering in the last decade of our life, which isn't necessary and was not part of human history before the Industrial Revolution.
I just wanted to start this episode with a message of thanks. Thank you to everyone that chooses to listen to this podcast. By doing this, you're enabling me to reach more people so that they might learn how to unchain the pain to live a healthier, happier life. The feedback that I get from those that take action and are inspired by the show's content is incredibly rewarding. So I'd like to ask you a teeny tiny favour. You are truly able to change the course of this podcast, the types of guests I have on this show, and everything that I do by doing one simple thing. And that is simply hitting the subscribing button. The guests on this podcast are incredible because so many of you have hit that button. When I think of what I want to do this year on this show, this is fueled by the amount of you that subscribe, that tune in, and that comment on the show's content. So please keep subscribing, keep commenting. Any type of comment, please keep them coming, and keep sharing the shows that you find inspiring. I can't wait to see what this year brings for this show, for you, for my community, and for this platform. Thank you. Welcome to the show, Brain Health, Unchaining Your Pain. I am joined by the amazing Dr. Jenny Goodman. Welcome to the show, Jenny.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Ruth.
Oh, I'm so pleased to have you back because the last time we met was not that long ago at the British Society of Ecological Medicine event where you talked about your latest book, which is amazing. And I think the work that you're doing is just fantastic to bring the information into the public perspective as to how we are surrounded by toxins and really need to be aware of and reduce those risks. So I'm really looking forward to talking to you today.
Well, I'm really glad to be here. Yes, we met at the BSEM's Brain Health Conference, didn't we? Only a month ago,
yeah.
Like 18th of October, yeah.
Yeah, amazing. So those that don't know Dr. Jenny Goodman, she's qualified as a doctor in 1982. Excuse me, and since 2000 she's been practicing ecological medicine, which is a radically different approach, which you'll of course explain through the course of this interview. And she's finally found a way to practice medicine that's preventative, natural, and truly health sustaining. She's author of Staying Alive in Toxic Times, a seasonal guide to lifelong health, and her new book, Staying Alive, her new book, Getting Healthy in Toxic Times, an ecological doctor's prescription for healing the body and the planet. And she's recently retired from medical practice to focus on writing books, which I think is amazing because so many people need to read it. Both books need to be the Bibles on every house person's shelf, particularly parents, to help themselves and their families. So thank you so much for writing those books. Before we start, I'd love to know what you are passionate about in life right now.
Well, getting the word out, really, which is why I'm still writing and also giving endless talks. And it's lovely because people are saying to me, having read the book, what many of my patients said to me, which is, you've changed my life. And that's pretty addictive. One wants to carry on doing that. To be able to make a difference is a great privilege and an honor. And I'm enjoying it. Yeah, so I'm passionate about the work that I'm doing, but also in an optimistic and empowering frame. This is about the fact that knowledge is power. And some of what I have to share about the toxicity in our environment and therefore potentially in our bodies is quite scary. It's potentially quite scary, but I'm absolutely convinced that it's better to know than not to know, because we can put our heads in the sand and then be overwhelmed and overpowered by the effects of these toxins, or we can face and ride through the mental overwhelm that you can get from learning all this stuff, but then we can change. You know, if you know what's out there, you can avoid it, you can detox it, you can transform your own health. If you don't know, you can't change things. And if you do know, you can. So I'm also about giving people the hope and courage to face the difficult information I'm going to share and use it to transform their health and their family's health.
Yeah, and I think it's such an important topic, because I first learned about it when I was going through my brain health professional training with the Amen clinics, and toxicity is one of the 11 risk factors for cognitive decline. And I think what's important, that what you do is that you're allowing people to make informed choices. Currently, people are making misinformed choices through misinformation being distributed. And I think what I love about the work that you do is you tell it as it is. You explain the facts behind what is causing us to experience the changes in our health states that we didn't have 50, 100 years ago. Just
I think that's really important, because, you know, yes, I'm going to be talking about how crucial nutrition is and how dangerous toxins are, and how we can use nutrition and other methods to get rid of the toxins, how we can know where they are in our environment, how we can avoid them. But actually we need to, and that's what ecological medicine does. The nutritional medicine half of it is putting the good stuff back in. The environmental half of it is identifying and taking the bad stuff out. But we also need to know why we're nutritionally depleted in the first place, and why we've got toxins on board. But prior to all that, rewinding in a sense, before all that, why is this an issue at all? Why do we need to know about it? And this is epidemiological. This is about the changes in the public's health, the population's health, as you were implying, over the past 50 years, but actually over the past 200 years, really. Going back to the Industrial Revolution, we have been deprived of sunshine, fresh air, exercise. We've been fed on junk food and exposed to numerous synthetic chemicals, about 100,000 at the latest count, with which our bodies are not evolved to cope, right? Our detox systems don't know what to do with all this stuff. They were evolved for things like stinging nettles and our own estrogen. And so we're all genetically different. Some people cope much better than others with the industrial toxins that surround us in our lives. But the point is, we need to face up to the fact that we are iller than we were as a population, and we are iller than we need to be. And so the purpose of identifying the causes is to reverse the trend in illness that conventional medicine both admits and denies in the same breath. All right. So when pressed, epidemiologists and other doctors will say, yes, cancer is at the highest rate ever. Yes, it's going up fastest among young people. There are 3 million with diabetes in the UK, 1 million with dementia, that's just the ones that are diagnosed. Vast numbers of people with heart attacks, cancer, autoimmune disease, and neurodegenerative conditions, Parkinson's, MS, Alzheimer's, and so on. But they will tell us that the reason is that we've got an aging population. And it's not true. And it's so important that we know it's not true, so we can look for the real causes. Firstly, we're not aging faster than people did in the middle of the 19th century. We're just aging sicker. We have this ghastly, prolonged twilight of disability and suffering in the last decade of our life, which isn't necessary and was not part of human history before the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so people, if you read Dickens, you will know people lived into their 80s and 90s just like we do now, but they kept their marbles and they kept their physical energy. This idea that we are living much longer than our ancestors is based on a simple arithmetical mistake, which is we are told that we live into our 80s and 90s, but in the mid-19th century, the average age of death was 45. Well, the average age of death was, But that's because a quarter of the population died before they reached the age of 5 because of the infectious diseases that ravaged everybody's childhood, diseases which are only serious in the conditions in which people lived. So very, very overcrowded, terrible nutrition, smoke, no fresh air. It's like Dickens' industrial London, and Manchester was an absolute hellhole. And so a quarter of kids died before they reached the age of 5. And if you take those kids out of the population, which changed, by the way, with improved living conditions and more space and more air and so on, when you take those kids out of the equation, they lived precisely as long as we do. So it's not about aging, it's about what we are doing to ourselves. And that's where we need to look at nutrition and environmental factors, because our genes change only extremely slowly over millennia, but the environment has changed over a couple of 100 years, which is a tiny blip. It's a millisecond in the time scale of biological evolution. So we're living in an environment that isn't fit for us. And we need to learn how to change the environment and how to protect our bodies. Both of those, because you can't separate what we're doing to the planet from what we're doing to our own bodies. We breathe the air, we drink the water, we eat the food that's grown in the soil. So what's missing from the soil is missing from our plate, and whatever we spray on the soil gets into the water and the air, gets into us. What goes around comes around.
I think that's so important, because you open your book with everything is connected. And I think we forget that connection between our internal world within ourselves and the external world, where our skin is the barrier between the two. And we need to pay much more attention to the environment that we've been exposed to, and the environment that we expose ourselves to deliberately.
That's right. And the skin, of course, is not an impermeable barrier, nor are the lungs, and nor is the mouth, right? I mean, through the mouth and the nose, the lungs, the skin, we interface with our environment. That's why ecological medicine is called ecological, because it sees the human being as a completely inseparable, inextricable part of, the plants, the animals, the trees, the air, everything we live in and on. We can't separate our own health from that of our mother, the earth. And that's why we need to clean up our act on this planet, in order that our children may have a chance of not just surviving, but thriving.
Yeah, I agree. And I know you've go into Earth 1 and Earth 2, your first 2 chapters, where you talk about, is it nourishing or toxic? I wondered if you could just dive in a little bit to what does that mean?
So what happened was that about 3 or 4 years ago, the response to my first book, which came out just before lockdown, so it was muted because of that. But it's all about nutrition according to the seasons. But the final chapter is about toxicity in our life and how we can use nutrition and other methods to get rid of it. And the response to that chapter was overwhelming, because let's face it, there are a vast number of good books about nutrition out there, but almost nothing about the flip side, the dark side, the poisons that are also getting into our bodies, along with however many nutrients. And of course, toxins are anti-nutrients and nutrients are anti-toxins. That was where the interest was. And increasingly, that was where my interest was, because I'd seen so many people, from babies, children, right into old age, made sick by environmental toxins, which I could find if I did a blood sample, or more usefully, a fat sample, occasionally a hair or sweat sample. But I was finding these toxins in people's systems, and they were completely correlating with their clinical symptoms. And then I discovered that there's a vast literature out there that most doctors just do not read, from journals such as Environmental Health Perspectives or Journal of the Total Environment. There are hundreds of really excellent peer-reviewed journals which have published thousands upon thousands of peer-reviewed papers from all over the world, showing very clearly the links between our environmental, industrial, toxic exposures and our burgeoning disease rates. So I spent a year or two being too overwhelmed with this information to do anything about it. And then I thought, well, I've got to tell people, but I don't want to overwhelm them. So the question became how to categorize this information. I sat with that for a full year. And then in a cottage in Snowdonia, in the pouring rain, it suddenly came to me in a flash. The most basic categories that, you know, are an intrinsic part of our intellectual history, our mythical and folklore history, but also our physics lessons, the 3 states of matter, solid, liquid, gas, and radiant energy. So it came to me, this is earth, water, air, and fire. And I thought there were going to be 4 chapters, earth, water, air, and fire. But earth morphed into parts 1 and 2, and fire also morphed into chapters 5 and 6 because there was so much to say. So the earth chapters are looking first and foremost at the soil. And initially I was looking at farming and how pesticides and synthetic fertilizers are wrecking the life of the soil, because the soil is alive. It's full of crucial bacteria, viruses, fungi, earthworms, insects, invertebrates, all of which are essential for the health of any crop that you plant in that soil. And the pesticides and herbicides, insecticides and fungicides are killing those good and vital fellow creatures that live in the soil. And many other things about farming methods like deep ploughing and leaving bare earth are also damaging the soil, separating farm animals from arable crops. All of these methods of industrial intensive over farming, chemical agriculture, are doing untold damage to our soil, therefore to the crops, therefore to our health. So I looked into this in great depth, and I went and spent time on organic farms talking to the farmers about and learning how perfectly possible it is to manage without these chemicals. Right? So there are loads of methods, and 7 basic methods I describe in chapter 1 of the new book, explaining how it's perfectly possible to farm organically without these chemicals, to grow healthy food, and the yield is not diminished. The yield is as good or better than chemical farming, which still predominates, although the organic farming revolution is gathering a tremendous amount of steam, and more farmers are transitioning to organic. The government needs to support them rather than putting obstacles in their way. But we as consumers can support them and provide tremendous health insurance for our own bodies by eating organic. So let me tell you a little bit about why we should transition away from pesticide-laden food. Right? These chemicals have only existed for less than 100 years. They were developed as weapons of war, nerve gases. And after the end of the Second World War, the manufacturers repurposed them. They didn't want to lose their profits and, you know, go off and train to do Alexander technique or something else. They wanted to keep making the vast profits they had made by producing nerve gases during the war. And so they repurpose them as pesticides, and they do kill many living things, and they damage all living systems because our biochemistry is not so different from that of the gnat. And they damage first and foremost the nervous system, which is not surprising because they were developed as nerve gases. So they are strongly linked in countless studies with the development of Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, motor neuron disease, Alzheimer's, and they're also linked with cancer and with reproductive disease, infertility, birth defects, and endocrine disruption. Because what we need to know about the pesticides, and it applies to all petrochemicals because they are petrochemical, it applies also to plastics and many other industrial toxins. They are lipophilic, right? That means they're fat soluble. They dissolve in fat, which means they'll go in through the skin and they'll go in through all the lining surfaces of the body because they go straight through cell membranes. So they'll reach every system of the body, but they will head first and foremost to the fattiest organ of the body, which is the brain. The brain is made of fat, and it needs to be made of good fats, not toxic fats. So, you know, lots of olive oil and coconut oil and good omega-3 and the good omega-6s. And avocados and nuts and seeds, all those things which feed the brain, organic free-range egg yolks, protects to some extent against these lipophilic toxins. Right, so pesticides are clearly linked with all those ghastly illnesses, especially breast cancer. And it's really simple to avoid them. You eat organic, which is not some kind of weird new hippie food. It is old-fashioned food. It's what our great-grandparents and all our ancestors going back 1 million years ate. It is simply food that hasn't been sprayed with toxic pesticides, herbicides like glyphosate, insecticides, and so on. And in animal food, it's simply an animal that hasn't been fed on antibiotics, hasn't been dosed with hormones, and hasn't eaten food grown with synthetic herbicides. So that's all it is. And the way organic farmers avoid using these toxic products is by having a lot of biodiversity in there, mimicking nature, abundant life, infinite variety, 3 crops growing in one field together. I've seen this, oats, barley, and peas. It works. They each feed each other. They take different nutrients out of the soil. Nature doesn't make monocrops. And interestingly, if we do eat these monocrop pesticide infested foods, we end up with a monocrop microbiome in our gut, right? The same rich variety of bacteria that we need in our gut is what we also need in the soil. And if it's in the soil, it's in our gut, it's in our bodies. So the second chapter about the earth was looking at heavy metals, because it turns out we've been mining as long as we've been farming. So we've dug up really toxic metals from the earth, whether it's aluminium, arsenic, cadmium, nickel, lead, mercury, and they've got into the air and the water and the soil through industrial processes, through also the fact that they are part of petrochemicals. They're part of crude oil because they live in the crust of the earth. And although we dig crude oil and coal out from deep under the earth, they are naturally contaminated with these heavy metals. So when we're burning coal and oil, we're burning these heavy metals as well. And of course, some people have still got mercury amalgam in the fillings in their teeth, and we know it's released. We know it has a straight route into the brain via the myelin sheath of the olfactory nerve. There's only about an inch from the top of the nose into the brain by the first cranial nerve, the olfactory nerve of smell. Right, if you can smell it, it's in your brain. So mercury gets in by that route. It gets in through the gums. We know it's in the bloodstream. There's countless studies showing this. And I describe in both books, actually, how to safely get your mercury fillings removed and replaced. Really important not to have it done by the high street dentist, but also not to do it until you have topped up all the nutrients that combat mercury. All right. So for every toxin, there's an antitoxic nutrient. To be safe with mercury in the system and with getting mercury out of the system, you need really good levels of the nutrients that fight it and the herbs that detox it. So the nutrients are zinc, selenium, iron, iodine, and the herbs are chlorella and cilantro, which is coriander, but has to be organically grown, because cilantro works to detox mercury precisely because it has an affinity with it. It grabs onto it. And if you've got all the good nutrients in place, it will take it out of the body. But it will equally grab onto it in the soil if it's grown in contaminated soil on the site of an old factory or mine, for example. So it's crucial that your cilantro and your chlorella be high grade organic. But we can get these toxins out of the body. And similarly with aluminium. Interestingly, it's definitely okay to talk about lead being toxic. They took it out of petrol because the lead industry was in total decline. So there was no fight back from the industry. With mercury, sorry?
I said I love this bit on the petrol. I'd love to talk about that a little bit, but just carry on with mercury.
Yeah, well, the thing about mercury is the mercury industry is just beginning to decline, and therefore it has been possible for the word to get out there that mercury is toxic. The EU is stopping mercury fillings. This country is dragging its heels and saying, well, we'll stop it in children under 15 and pregnant women, which just means it's toxic, okay? But it's more and more possible to have non-mercury fillings. And of course, if you brush your teeth and stay off the sugar, you won't need many fillings in the first place. But the industry that is still very, very huge and powerful is the aluminium industry. And that is why it's so difficult to get the word out that aluminium is a neurotoxin. They took it out of childhood vaccines in around the early 2000s and replaced it with aluminium. Interestingly, the rationale for the two metals being in the vaccines was completely different. Mercury was in there as an antibacterial, which it is. That's why it damages the microbiome. It used to be used to treat syphilis. And when they took it out, And then they put aluminium in, not as an antibacterial, because it isn't, but as an immune adjuvant to increase the reactivity of the immune system to whatever part of a virus or bacterium was being put in there. But aluminium is toxic. It damages the brain. It's implicated in Alzheimer's disease. It's implicated in breast cancer, particularly if you use it in underarm deodorants, because, you know, the axilla, the armpit, is extremely near the breast. And most tumors do occur on the upper outer quadrant of the breast, nearest to the armpit, and they have been found to contain aluminium. You can get safe deodorants, or you can just ditch the deodorant and wash. Right. So the final chapter of my book has a lot about how you can get safer personal care products. Everything in your bathroom cabinet can be replaced by a herbal, safe, natural version that's not toxic. Okay, so talking about these heavy metals is difficult when there's vast millions of pounds of profits involved. So,
and I think, you know, we see a lot of it in the toothpaste as well. So I think there's titanium oxide, isn't there, in toothpaste as well, that
there is
helpful.
Titanium, which is an unnecessary white dye. There is fluoride, which we'll come on to in a second, which is very toxic. Yeah. You can get fluoride-free toothpaste. You can tell the dentist not to put fluoride drops on your teeth or the children's teeth, which they do. Dentists do it without asking. And they're even telling they're telling kids not to rinse after they brush so that they do keep the fluoride in their mouths. All right, so this leads us on to talking about pollution in water. And of course, these are not separate compartments. What's in the soil leaches into the water and vice versa, and it all gets into the air. But you have to get your head around it somehow. So you need a system of categories. So what's coming out of your tap is chlorine, which is put in there to kill bad bacteria. But there are other ways of making the water bacteriologically safe from microorganisms. So in Holland, they use physical filtering and ultraviolet light, because ultraviolet light, which is a component of sunshine, kills all known germs. You know, like iodine, it kills on contact. And so the Dutch are not drinking chlorine. Right? So the chlorine isn't necessary. Use ultraviolet. What a surprise that sunshine kills dangerous bacteria. Didn't we all know that?
Well,
already?
Anybody who's got a pond, we've got a pond at home, you use a UV light to get in there. It's just the same principle, isn't it? So.
Exactly, as well as making vitamin D for us in our skin. Now, chlorine is dangerous partly because it's a toxic halogen. And if you remember your GCSE chemistry, or if you're as old as me, your O-level chemistry, you know that the halogens, group 7 in the periodic table of the elements, have the same, they're group 7 because they all have 7 electrons in the outermost electron orbit of the atom. And they are fluorine, chlorine, bromine, and iodine. Very different roles in the body. Right, fluorine and fluoride, that's the halide form where it's gained an electron from another atom and acquired a stable outer orbit. Fluorine and fluoride are both toxic. Jumping down to bromine, bromine and bromide are both toxic. And of course, bromine is in the fire retardants, which need by law to be added to your synthetic soft furnishings, your non-organic mattress, your sofas, carpets, curtains, cushions, and so on. Bromine and bromide are both toxic. Chlorine
don't they use bromine as well in jacuzzis and stuff? Is it bromine they use in
jacuzzis?
Yes,
as though it were, that some people do, as though it were better than chlorine, but actually the only one that's safe would be iodine. So yeah, bromine and bromide are toxic. Chlorine is toxic, but chloride is essential. It's, you know, it's in our bloodstream. It's part of seawater. It's part of natural salt. But interestingly, with iodine, both iodine and iodide are completely essential, and different organs of the body need different versions. So the thyroid needs iodide. Breast and prostate tissue need iodine, and if they don't get enough, they expand and you get tumors. Right? So iodine is the best kept secret. Right? It's safe, it's cheap, it's naturally occurring. There's no profit in it because it can't be patented. And I have shrunk breast tumors with it, and you know, so have many of my colleagues. And I've seen people with 0 iodine coming down with ovarian tumors and breast tumors. So we need that iodine from fish, especially white fish, right? We need the oily fish, omega-3s. We need the white fish for iodine. And if you are a vegetarian or vegan, you can get your iodine from seaweed. Seaweed is an essential human food. We evolved from the sea. We need what's in the sea. But many of us need supplements. But the point is, the reason we're so iodine deficient is not just lack of it in the diet. It is because it gets pushed out of the body by what looks a bit similar to the body, the toxic chlorine and bromine and fluoride. So we need to talk about fluoride. First, I will tell you the good news, which is on the 24th of September this year, 2024, a federal court in California, after a 7-year trial in which the wonderful Fluoride Action Network brought vast amounts of evidence to court, and the judge considered it and decided the evidence was overwhelming that the level of fluoride in people's tap water in the USA was damaging children's IQ, was significantly lowering children's IQ. And I mean, the evidence is very clearly there. Fluoride damages the brain. It does lower IQ. It also damages the kidneys, the thyroid, the ovary, and the bone. Very important. There's a lot about what it does to the bone architecture in this chapter in my book. We think that we need the bone to be denser to not fracture. But actually what they found in postmenopausal women was the higher their intake of fluoride, the higher their level of fluoride as measured in their own urine, the greater the chance of fractures. Fluoride does make bones and teeth more dense, but it also makes them more brittle. So the bone density thing is an oversimplification. And I mean, I can't begin to tell you how many thousands of studies confirm all this. So why is there fluoride in the drinking water in America, in Canada, in the Republic of Ireland since 1964, in Birmingham and the West Midlands since 1964? Now, I've been quite slow on the uptake about this because since the year 2000, I've seen children and adults from all over Europe and the British Isles, a lot of them with neurodevelopmental problems. And it took me years before I noticed that I was seeing a disproportionate number of kids from Birmingham and the Republic of Ireland with serious developmental disorders of brain and bone, right? And you measure fluoride in their urine, it is through the roof. It's ridiculously high. The safe level is 0. Fluoride is not a nutrient. It has no place in human metabolism. Way to keep the teeth strong and healthy, because that's the very flimsy excuse they're using for putting fluoride in the water. The way to keep teeth healthy is to keep the kids off the sugar and brush the teeth with a fluoride-free toothpaste, like Green People or Kingfisher or Aloe Dent. You know, you can get toothpaste without fluoride.
So you can get it on Amazon. It's so easy. You know, and I just want to impress people. It's not expensive. It's not any more expensive.
No, it's not more expensive, but you can get more ethical retailers than Amazon, and you can and you can go to your local health food shop, you know. But the point is, the obvious question that arises is, if this stuff is so lethal, especially to children's mental health and brain development, which we have known since the 1930s, the papers go back that far, then why would anyone want to put it in the drinking water? And this is where it gets really sinister, and I won't pretend to understand all of it. But we do need to look at who's profiting from this, and therefore where this fluoride is coming from. What it is that's being put in the water is hexafluorosilicic acid. Now, hear the hexa in there. One molecule of this stuff has got 6 atoms of fluoride. Okay, fluoride bound to carbon is an unbreakable bond. It's toxic, it's persistent. It's coming from the phosphate fertilizer industry. Right, the factories where they make phosphate fertilizer, right, synthetic fertilizers that are damaging our soil and our health in ways I haven't had a chance to go into, but it's in chapter 1 of the new book. They produce this hexafluorosilicic acid as a waste product. And they were forbidden in the 1940s and 50s to release fluoride from factory chimneys because we knew it was toxic. Then they tried releasing it onto the fields and all the animals died. And they're not allowed to put it in the rivers. So now they've got this system they call wet scrubbers, which produces hexafluorosilicic acid. And when it leaves their factories, it is legally classified as hazardous waste. Then when it's added to the water, it is, by an Orwellian sleight of linguistic hand, it's reclassified as a water treatment agent. Note, it's not reclassified as a medicine, because then it would have to go through safety tests, which it would fail. And the phosphate fertilizer companies, having previously classified it as a waste product, are suddenly calling it a co-product. They're saying, we make phosphate fertilizers for the farmers, and we make hexafluorosilicic acid to help children's dental health. Anything fluoride does do to the teeth, by the way, it does by contact, by putting on. There is no justification, even if you persist in the mistaken belief that it's good for children's teeth. There's no justification for mass medicating the entire population. So every time they drink a glass of water, they are drinking fluoride, which has no place in human metabolism and drives out the essential iodine. So the solution is twofold. If you're in an area where there's fluoride, and even if you aren't, because there's still chlorine in the water and other toxins we come on to, filter your water. Get a good, ideally plumbed in, ideally whole house water filter. And I discuss in the book how to find a jolly good, reliable, effective water filter. And take a little bit of iodine to get that fluoride out of your system, just for a while. And then eat the fish and the seaweed that contain the iodine. So what else is coming out of your tap? Unfortunately, nanoplastics, tiny particles or microplastics, because they're everywhere. But you don't have to drink water out of plastic bottles. You can drink water out of glass and glass bottles. More and more glass bottles available to carry your water in. Don't wrap your food in cling film. You can replace virtually everything in your home that is plastic with non-plastic alternatives, which again I describe in the book, and I also refer the readers to two wonderful thin little books, one by Greenpeace and one by Natalie Fay, called Go Plastic Free. We can get the plastic out of our lives and we can get it out of our bodies. It is not only choking the oceans and the fish, it's damaging us, because just like pesticides, it's an endocrine disruptor. Plastic, it's also neurotoxic. It's linked with brain cancer, particularly in kids, but it's very strongly linked with cancer of the reproductive organs, like the breast, the womb, the cervix, the ovary, and the prostate and the testes, because it sits on estrogen receptors and sends out an estrogenic signal. And that's one of the ways in which plastics do their damage. And there are other toxins coming out of the tap. They can all be dealt with by fitting an effective water filter. And
it's amazing, isn't it? Because we started 200 years ago, we didn't have any clean water. And thankfully the government put clean water in, and that helped with the rates of diphtheria and everything else that was going on in the Industrial Revolution. And now we've kind of gone backwards.
Well, we have
putting toxins back in the water that have no place in the human body, that is actually deteriorating its health. And
well, that's right. I mean, in 1854, when John Snow removed the handle from the pump in Soho that was giving people contaminated water, and people were dying of cholera because there was sewage in the Thames. And now here we are again with the water companies allowing sewage in the water. So yeah, we do need to make the water clean, but it needs to be free not just of sewage, but of all the artificial chemicals we're adding to it. And then we need to look at air pollution. And there are two types. There's what's coming out of the exhaust pipe and incinerators and factory chimneys. Remembering the exhaust pipe is just at about the height of a toddler's nose. And all of that requires collective action. And there are some individual things you can do. You can avoid walking along the main road. You can take the quieter back routes. You can walk as far from the curb as possible. These things do actually make a difference. But this is about campaigning and collective action to get us out of our cars and reduce the pollution. But there's also indoor pollution, which the whole of chapter 7 of my new book is devoted to. I think the subtitle is The Surprising Poisonings of Everyday Life. You know, we are spraying air fresheners around our home into our kids' lungs. You know, we are using all sorts of toxic cleaning chemicals which are totally unnecessary and can either be ditched or replaced by safe, natural, herbal alternatives, or just by bicarbonate of soda. We're putting stuff on our skin, the moisturizer, the deodorant, the perfume, the aftershave, none of which are necessary, and all of which can be replaced by safe herbal alternatives. The skin is the largest organ of the body, and whatever we put on it is absorbed. And some people would say, you shouldn't put anything on your skin that you wouldn't put in your mouth. You can use coconut oil as a moisturizer, many other safe alternatives. But if you get a whole house water filter, so you're no longer bathing and showering in chlorine, you'll find you need much less moisturizer because your skin won't get so dry. And, mattresses, carpets, furniture, all of this stuff, there are safe ways of doing it. But the safest thing to do, unless you're on a main road, is to open the window and let these toxins out of the window, and also let the mold spores out of the window. Mold is a whole other issue that is implicated in mental illness, chronic fatigue, cancer. And if you don't open the window and keep the house tolerably warm, in this country, unfortunately, there's going to be mold. So all
I agree. And I was just going to say, mold is very close to my heart because my dad was highly sensitive to mold. He had COPD, and he had to have HEPA filters in the house to remove all the mold spores. And I think it's something that, and we have other members of the family who have similar conditions to my father who've been struggling with mold in the house. And I think people underestimate the impact that mold can have on your not only your cognitive health but your whole health.
I think that's right. And in my first book, in the autumn chapter, significantly in the autumn chapter, I devote quite a few pages to mold because it does get worse in September, October. There are outdoor molds, which, gardeners, if they're sensitive and they start raking the leaf mold, that can affect them quite badly. You need to wear a mask to do that if you're sensitive. But mold indoors, we have a real dilemma here because we need to mimic the conditions of the southern Mediterranean, southern Europe, where it's dry and warm and very little mold can grow. But we're in a temperate climate where it rains all the time. And it's really hard to have mold-free homes because what do? We shower, we bath, we cook, and we exhale, we breathe out. All of that creates water vapor. And if all your windows are shut and you have insulated thoroughly, where does that water vapor go? It goes to where the walls meet the ceiling, it condenses and it creates damp, which is what molds like. And the mold accumulates and it makes us ill. So the dilemma here is that normally, in almost all instances, what's good for the planet is what's good for the person. But here we have a slight problem because, what's good for the planet is obviously using less energy and therefore insulating and conserving heat. But the only way to avoid mold in your home is to keep it warm and open the windows. So, people come into your home and say, but all the heat's going out of the windows. And you have to say, I'm sorry, but so are the mold spores. So, I do this and I contribute to charities that plant trees to make up for that extra carbon footprint. But if you don't open the windows, you will have mold. And there's no way around that, unfortunately. And it's
I think it's also interesting. Sorry, Jo, I was just going to say, I think it's also interesting that when you get your house insulated, the government came out with a recent thing where you boost the insulation in your house. They actually plug in to the gaps of your walls newspaper or old paper. So if you get any damp within those cavities, that's the first breeding ground for mold. So you don't actually have to see it for it to be there. It can be behind the cladding that's on the inside of your house and still be
right. That's right. And you can't always see, if you can see black mold patches, you've definitely got it. But I had a colleague actually who got really, really ill, all the symptoms of mold, but there was no mold in her house. And then they removed a bookcase that had been fixed to the wall for years, and behind it was black. And it's a weird one in the sense that mold is not a synthetic chemical we've manufactured, but we're living in a synthetic fashion. We're living very indoors, you know, and yeah, people have always lived indoors, but they used to spend 90% of their time outdoors working in the fields. And now we're spending 90% of our time indoors, which means that if we change what's going on in our homes, we can transform our health. You know, that's the plus side of it. There are so many ways to make the home a real sanctuary and a really healthy place. And that's what the final chapter is about. But we've only been talking about chemical pollution. There is also physical pollution, radiation, energy.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what chapters 5 and 6 of the book are about. And I know you wanted to discuss this because you have a special
I'd love
interest.
to discuss this.
So let's start at the beginning. We evolved in the electromagnetic field of planet Earth, right? That's what we are evolved to cope with. And you can be in touch with that again by going and standing barefoot on the grass or on the beach if you're lucky enough, right? We also evolved with the middle of the electromagnetic spectrum, with visible light. You know, if you remember from school, Richard of York gave battle in vain. That's red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. And then next to violet, you've got ultraviolet, which is essential for its antibacterial action, for waking us up in the morning, and for making vitamin D in our skin, preferentially when balanced by what's next to red, which is infrared. Far infrared, near infrared, essential for healing, essential for detox, feeling warm and cozy. That's what's coming out of a blazing fire. And an infrared sauna and an infrared lamp. That's what we need. That's what we've evolved with. But actually, in the past 100 years, we have created radiation, which is way to the extremes, both sides, right? If you go way beyond ultraviolet, you get very short wavelength, very high frequency radiation, which is what X-rays are, gamma rays, nuclear radiation. That is what's been coming out of nuclear power plants since 1945, and it is lethal. There have been clusters of children with leukemia around all the nuclear power plants, including Sellafield, which used to be called Windscale, in Cumbria, in the Lake District in this country, in the UK. And after Chernobyl, there was suddenly a huge explosion of thyroid cancer in children. That's from the radioactive iodine. Thyroid cancer didn't exist in children before that. Wherever there's nuclear power, there's leukemia and there's cancer. And there is no way around that. And I spoke for this chapter, chapter 5, to Greenpeace, to Friends of the Earth, and to the Green Party. And they all admitted when pushed that they know nuclear power is not safe. It's also not cheap. It's not green. It's not sustainable. And it's not the answer to our energy crisis. Genuinely sustainable things like wind power and wave power and so on are truly sustainable. Nuclear power is dangerous. And I said to them, you guys were shouting about this loudly in the 70s and 80s, and everybody knew about the cancers in children around Windscale, Sellafield. Why are you so quiet about it? Why have I had to push you for you to admit that you know it's dangerous? And they said, well, things are difficult. You know, they wouldn't say more than that. Greenpeace did say a bit more than that. But basically, they're scared to shout about it because the nuclear industry is hugely powerful. That's at one end of the electromagnetic spectrum. If you go past visible light right to the other end, you have very long wavelength, low frequency radiation, which is called non-ionizing radiation because unlike X-rays and gamma rays, it doesn't actually have the power to knock electrons out of atoms. But it turns out to be just as dangerous. And it turns out to damage what are called the voltage-gated calcium channels. Right? I need to explain what these are. Our cell membrane is a semi-permeable barrier. It keeps some things out, it lets some things in. And the way it lets things in is by having portals made of a protein shaped like a pore that will open to let some ions in, that's charged atoms, and others out. So these are like, if you like, they're like the gates in the wall around a medieval city. There is a guard at the gate who says, who comes here? And if the person wanting to come in knows the password, they're allowed in. Now, in our cell membranes, the password is a very subtle electrical signal, which will allow an ion, that's a charged atom of calcium, into the cell. It's bringing a message. This is called cell signaling, because mostly calcium is an extracellular ion. It lives outside the cell. It's magnesium that lives inside. So when a calcium ion is let in, it's because it's bringing a message. What opens the channel to let it in? A subtle electrical signal. But now, the electromagnetic radiation that's coming out of our mobile phones, our Wi-Fi routers, Bluetooth, the cell phone towers that are everywhere, is an overwhelming electrical signal. It forces the voltage-gated ion channels wide open, and calcium floods into the cell. And that, along with the oxidative stress that this electromagnetic radiation creates, is implicated in virtually every disease, especially brain tumors, especially mental illness, but also other kinds of cancer. And this is incredibly hard to hear. It is the most inconvenient truth we are facing. I really wish it wasn't so, but there are thousands of papers showing the dangers of this electromagnetic radiation. There are also thousands showing that it's perfectly safe. And those are the ones funded by the big tech industry. All of the studies funded by independent sources, done by independent scientists, are showing danger. And in fact, even some of the industry-funded studies couldn't disguise the fact that this stuff is dangerous. If you live less than 600 meters from a mobile phone mast, cell phone tower, base station, which have sprung up everywhere, your risk of Alzheimer's is much greater than if you live further away. So all the illnesses we had anyway, but that were quite rare, particularly brain tumors in young men. I mean, this is heartbreaking. And the evidence shows that if you hold the phone touching your head, your risk is very considerable. If you hold it even a couple of inches away, your risk is vastly diminished, right? This is the good news. We can use this technology safely. And chapter 6 in my book, called Poisonous Tech, is there to tell people how to use it safely. You don't need to let go of the internet. You don't need to lose contact with your friends. You don't need to stop working from home. But there are ways to use this technology which make it much safer. There are Ethernet cables. There are distances that we need to put between ourselves and the technology, using the speakerphone function, using all sorts of new products that I explain where you can get them that are not prohibitively expensive, buying meters so that you know if your neighbor's Wi-Fi is coming through your wall, and there is protective paint you can use to stop that. So the technology could have been designed at a frequency that was not so harmful to human physiology. It's a great shame that they haven't. They won't redesign it because that's admitting that they've been responsible for huge danger. But I mean, I think I can illustrate this best by describing what happened in 1979 when I was a third-year medical student. And all of us medical students from all over the city were summoned to the neurological ward to see a man of 44 with a brain tumor because it was so rare. And they showed us the CT scans and showed how the location of the tumor corresponded to the fact that his arm was paralyzed. And, the consultant neurologist got really excited about this, as though the patient in the bed weren't there, which was the style of the day. But the point is, he said to us, take note, because you will never see this again in your entire careers. And, he was so profoundly wrong. Because I can think of dozens of people I know who've had brain tumors. I only know one who has survived because she has stuck to the most unbelievably strict and difficult diet. She's done all sorts of healing modalities. She's put her life and soul into it. It is possible, especially if it's caught early. But unfortunately, the manufacturers know this, right? They know about the link between your mobile phone held next to your skull and brain tumors. So they've moved to the antenna of the phone from which the radiation is coming out. It's much lower down now. So what we're seeing now, salivary gland tumors. in the young, and throat cancers in young men. Throat cancer used to happen only in elderly men who'd been living on whiskey and smoking. You don't see young people, but now we do, because the antenna of the phone is lower down. And there's been a court case in Italy where the court agreed this businessman's acoustic neuroma, right, so tumor of the acoustic nerve, was indeed caused by his mobile phone. He was taking notes with his right hand and holding the phone to his head with his left hand, and there on the left acoustic nerve was this tumor. So we don't want to know this. It's massively inconvenient, but there are safe ways to live with this technology and protect yourself. And you can only protect yourself if you know. And that's why I've blown it open in this chapter of the book. I think it's the first book in the UK to talk about this so extensively, but plenty of good books published in America about it. And I do list them in the resources section. So, you know, let's make ourselves safe. And most of all, let's
I think it's so important, Jenny, though, for kids as well, because we don't have the history on the long-term impact. So radiation doesn't just suddenly magic a tumour up in a very short period of time. It's exposure over a long period of time, and we don't have that history because of how long mobile phones have been out for. In order to demonstrate the impact on kids.
We do from Sweden, because they adopted mobile phone use 20 years before everybody else. They have got long-term studies, and the long-term studies show that the earlier the age at which you started using a mobile phone, the greater your risk of a brain tumor. And there is now, thankfully, a movement to ban mobile phone use in the classroom for kids under 16. And I do actually agree with that. And they're doing it for a different reason. They think it's a distraction and the kids are exposed to all sorts of really vicious stuff online. Those are also two very good reasons. But there is also very strong evidence that it's damaging their health. I mean, there are kids who have died and kids who have committed suicide as a direct result of Wi-Fi in school. And this is being documented by a wonderful woman called Deborah Fry, whose daughter, Jenny Fry, died as a direct result of Wi-Fi in school. This is in my book, but Debbie Fry is giving talks everywhere. You take the Wi-Fi out of the classroom, suddenly the kids can concentrate again, they can sit still, they can think straight, they're not dropping their pencils, they're not manifesting all that ADHD type behavior, and they're calmer and their work is better. We do not need Wi-Fi in schools, and it's doing untold damage.
Yeah, thank you for your insights, Jenny. I know we're on time, but what one piece of advice would you give of all of the things that people can do? Sometimes it feels a bit overwhelming for people. Yeah. What would your one thing be out to people out there who listen to the show?
I'm not Michael Mosley of blessed memory. I can't do one thing. I'm going to do four. And the four things are: eat organic, filter your water, moderate your mobile phone use according to how I describe it in chapter 6 of the new book, and go through your home, your bathroom cabinets, your kitchen cabinets, your bedroom, with a fine-tooth comb, and chapter 7 of the new book in your hand. Don't use mothballs in your wardrobe, just spray lavender oil. There are simpler solutions to all of this. So check out your home, your phone, filter your water, eat organic. And those things are really transformational, but don't try and do it all at once. Take it easy, take it a step at a time, because every change helps and you don't need to do it all at once.
Yeah, that's great advice. And from the advice you've given, I've thrown out my Teflon saucepans. They went in the bin straight away.
Right, yeah.
To get rid of the toxins on there. So do make sure you get hold of Jenny's books. They are absolutely amazing. They're just such a Bible for any parent, any person that's worried about their health, the health of their family. So you've got Getting Healthy in Toxic Times and Staying Alive in Toxic Times, both brilliant additions to your bookshelf.
Thank you. And for anyone who's thinking of getting pregnant, right? For any
absolutely
man or woman who's thinking of making a baby. Yeah,
I absolutely agree. And you got some great recommendations of books in your Getting Healthy in Toxic Times, which I went through as quickly as possible. So make sure you get that, because there's some amazing book recommendations in Jenny's books on how you can learn more and really help yourself get healthy in toxic times. It's been fantastic. Thank you for joining me on my show. Remember, this show is all about brain health, unchaining your pain. You're not stuck with the brain you have, and Jenny has kindly been here to show us how from a whole body health perspective. Thanks, Dr. Jenny Goodman.
My pleasure. Thank you very, very much for the conversation.
You're most welcome. And do remember, make sure you look at the notes below, because we'll put all the links to Jenny's books on there, so that you can get hold of them and read them and apply the information that she's put in there to help you. Thank you.